How did we get to the retail world saying, let's captivate, let's capture this moment and not make it about Christ? Not make it about Jesus in any way, shape, or form. In fact, just the opposite of that. Let's make it about greed. Let's make it about trampling and hurting our brother and sister, whether they're a believer or not, in pursuit of things. You've heard me say this, in pursuit of things we probably don't need and we can't afford, to impress people that we probably don't even like. And so how did Christmas get to this point where it was about Black Friday? Well, I think the purpose of Christmas is this, the gospel. To get the gospel out. And in our celebration of Christmas, we completely missed the point, and so much so that it's become tragic. It's become tragic. And so last week I did share about the white envelope. And if you weren't here last week, I'll let you in a little bit. I shared this story. It was about a father who was just tired of the retail aspects of Christmas. And his wife always, struggled with what to get him, what to make him happy. And as a dad, sometimes you get really cheesy gifts. I haven't received the Christmas tie yet or anything like that. But this dad was just tired of the cliche retail parts of Christmas. And so his wife, in a way to change all of that, instead of getting him gifts, she started helping other people. There was a story how she helped a wrestling team. There was an inner city wrestling team that she helped by purchasing shoes and headgear for an inner city wrestling team that wrestled their son. And so that became a tradition that every year, instead of getting him a gift, there would be a white envelope in the tree. And in that envelope would be what she did, who she helped, who she loved. Instead of him receiving the gift, she was paying that forward. And it was really neat to see that even beyond, he had later lost his life to cancer. And then his legacy that he left was, even after he was gone, as the wife was struggling with Christmas that year, she still did the white envelope. And that morning when she did the white envelope, the tree was full of white envelopes from his kids. And it says even now his grandkids. So it's just neat to see that love. That right there is the essence that I think Christmas that we should be capturing. But even beyond that is we should be doing this. We should be sharing the gospel. We should be taking it to the world. So think about this. Why did Jesus come to the earth? Luke 4 says that he came to heal the brokenhearted and to set at liberty those that are bound. So we have this Jesus and we have this opportunity. And you know as well as I do that when we get to this time of the year, there's a lot of things that are happening. People are hurting for whatever reason that would be. Maybe it's a broken home. Maybe it's a broken relationship. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's the situation they can't afford to provide the things that everybody else is getting for their children, or whatever reason. There's so many things that can cause heartache rather than joy at Christmas. And we get so lost. Now don't get me wrong, man. I've got these 3 little girls. I finally got that right. Third time. Like it took me 3 times to say how many kids I have. For those of you that are new, last time, 2 times I talked about my daughters, I said I had 2 of them. But in that, we get so lost in sharing, the traditions of Christmas, and I'm just saying my family, but just in general. The things that we've created, but just the truth is sharing the gospel of Jesus. So we talked about this. They're all the broken hearts. They're whatever reasons for people to feel that way. But check this out. There's a statistic that says this. 85% of the people that say yes to Jesus, 85% of the people that say yes to the gospel of Jesus were invited and brought by a friend. And so in that, we should be encouraged in knowing this. It's such a scary thing for so many of us to really truthfully take the gospel beyond this room. I've been in that place. To take the gospel and really share that. To talk about something that maybe we don't know everything about. Maybe we don't know all the ins and outs. Maybe we don't know every piece of scripture on the Roman road to lead someone to salvation, but it's something we can learn. But what sometimes is so difficult for us, and I know this. I've had so many men come and talk to me that are just, and they're scared to death to pray with their wives and their children, let alone a stranger. But this time of year, we have to look. The statistics don't lie. 85% of the people that say yes to Jesus were invited by somebody. They were invited. They were invited. They were invited. And it says, and brought by a friend. Friends are some of the hardest people in our minds to reach with the gospel of Jesus. But the statistics are overwhelming in the opposite of that. 85%. If you told me I had 85% chance of anything, I'm going to take that chance. If you could have told me I was going to get an 85 all the way through school, I'm in. I would have excelled compared to what I did. In baseball, a 300 average, you're a Hall of Famer. 30%. 30%. And 85% of all cases. So here's our initiative, church, is to go and bring the gospel out to the people and bring the people to church. And that's the thing right there that matters so much is this, is that we would leave the confines of the building here. We would go into our world. I think there's a scripture that really kind of talks about this in Matthew. It talks about go into the world. Go into the world. And that's a big thing, but it says go into all of the world. It doesn't just say go into Joplin. It doesn't just say go into to Cambodia. It doesn't say just go into Syria. Just go into all the world. And so us as believers, we can localize that and look at our own life, because that's a huge world to see. And maybe we don't have the finances, maybe we don't have a passport, maybe we're scared to death, we don't want to go overseas, and I can understand that with the way that the world's been violent lately. But we can also, though, go into our world, go into your world. And right now is the perfect opportunity to do that. If there is ever a time of year that it is so easy to love somebody, to just love someone in a practical, real, God-loving way, it's right now. It is not hard to find someone in need of hope. It's not hard to find a friend in need of hope. And we're going to dig into that in just a little bit, about really digging into a friend. The Great Commission. We are to go into all the world and preach the gospel. Jesus didn't say that all people were to go to church. And nowhere in the scripture did Jesus say that all people were to go to church. But those in the church were commanded to go into all the world. So we have to think about that. Christ did die for all. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. So it encompasses, I'm in the world, you're in the world, everyone is in the world. He gave his son for the world. Everyone qualifies for his love. But who is called to take it? Not all the world necessarily is going to come to the church. But the church is commanded. That is a mandate by our commander-in-chief to go into the world. To take the gospel into the world. Into the dark places, into the friendly confines of our workplaces. And it's not just enough to just do this. I think a lot of us look at our life and you go, you know what? I am an example of clean living. And it's not just enough for us to live lives in a clean way. I mean, think about this. Think about this for just a minute with me, if you will. If you have the opportunity to save someone, if you have the opportunity, you have something that unlocks all of humanity, the great question, you have the opportunity to change someone's eternal address from hell to heaven. It's not just enough just to live in a clean way. I mean, people know that I love Jesus because of the way that I live. I abstain from this, I abstain from this, I abstain from this. Therefore, they can look at my life and see how to live. True. But we're called to go into the world and make disciples. We're called to go into the world and make disciples. To teach, to love others, to bring them in, to invest in one another. And so if we think about this, let's put it in a practical way. Is it enough for a teacher just to sit in a classroom with all the knowledge that they have and just say, well, I go into a classroom every day and the children come in and I live in a way that's studious. I have all the knowledge and I sit in the room and I show them how to be studious. Or what if you're a fireman and you go to a fire, there's a burning building and you have the opportunity to save everyone. You're like, well, I have the knowledge of how to get these people and I have the equipment and the resources to pull them from the fire. Is it enough to go into a burning building and just be a fireman? I'm here. Just going to live it. just going to live it? Is it enough to be like, I'm first aid certified, believe it or not. Do you know that it is a law? If you're a doctor, if you're a paramedic, if you're someone even that's simple as first aid certified, and there's ever a situation that you could assist in, that you could save someone. Now, when like the real paramedics get there, I step out of the way. Okay, like paramedics show up, and I'm like, "Excuse me, I've got this." I stayed at a Holiday Inn Select last night, and they left us down. But if I have the opportunity to save someone, what if a doctor knows that someone has cancer? Well, I'm a doctor. I know they have cancer. So I'm going to continue living as a doctor. You know, they've got a big trip planned. They've got some things going on. Life is really busy for them right now. It's kind of difficult for me to let them know that they have cancer. So I'm just going to continue living around them as a doctor while they die. Are you understanding? Like, are you connecting the dots with what I'm saying? And here we are as believers, the church. We are mandated by our commander-in-chief, Christ, to go into the world and love people. But not just that, but to baptize them, but then also to make disciples. To make disciples. And I think what a lot of the churches become really good at is this. Talk, evangelize. I'll get you saved. I'll tell you about Jesus. I'll love you to that point. But we really struggle as the church. We really struggle as the church in the making disciples part. We struggle as a church in the making disciples, where we truly do life with people and we love them, like Saul. Saul was a murderer of Christians. Saul was a murderer of Christians. But then something happened. Saul has this Damascus Road moment where all of a sudden, I love this, it says suddenly in some translations of the Bible, suddenly. I don't know about you, but I remember in my life a suddenly moment where all of a sudden it clicked. It wasn't a Damascus Road, I wasn't like it, but I had a suddenly moment. And so Paul, who was number one enemy, or Saul, was number one enemy of Christ, of Christians, so much so to the point that he was murdering them, has this suddenly moment on the road to Damascus. And he changes, like everything clicks, and all of a sudden he realizes the error. He realizes the tragedy. He realizes the truth. It's revealed to him. But it wasn't enough just for Saul to have the suddenly moment, because he was still Saul. There had to be a couple of other men in his life. There had to be a couple of other people in his life, Ananias and Barnabas, that had to come along and disciple Saul to the point that he became Paul. And you see, so often we want to relate and be like Paul. Everybody knows about Paul in the Bible. And if you don't, go read. More than likely, you're going to read something that Paul wrote. Just flip your Bible open and stick your finger down there. More than likely, there's a high percentage chance that Paul wrote the words that your finger lands on. Everyone wants to be like Paul. There's not a whole lot of people lining up to be like Ananias, to be like Barnabas, that had to walk alongside of him and help mature him and help bring him to the point of maturity that as he began to know Christ, it wasn't enough for him to just go, all right, man, I'm going to church, I'm living the life a little bit, I'm doing my thing. On Sundays, he had people in his life that invested in him. The Great Commission. And so Jesus, when he shares this, that we are to go into the world and baptize people and make disciples of them, the point in his life when he shared this was the end. Was the end of his earthly life, before it was all over, before he would lose communication physically. I mean, think about this. I've gotten to see two situations this week where somebody was at the end. I had an amazing honor earlier this week where I got to go in to a man as he was about to leave this world. And he accepted Christ. He said yes to Jesus before it was all over. He said yes, and we got to pray with him. And just a matter of 10 hours later, he went home. Those words that he said at the end were so important. The moments that he shared at the end of his life were so important. And Jesus himself, the last things that Jesus shared is right here. Of all the things that he could have said, he didn't say, you know what, I want some chicken. I would probably say something like that. Jesus shares right here, go into the world. Go into the world. Baptize people. Raise up disciples. Make believers of the world. I'm putting it in your hands. So some of the last words that he shared, and there was urgency. And this came as a shock to his disciples because of this. Which is surprising because Jesus so often when he talked to his disciples spoke specifically of his crucifixion. Spoke specifically of the end. And it's crazy. Like, have you ever... Let's see how I want to share this. Have you ever in your life, like think about this. Have you ever in your life... Let me back up. Let me share you a story. I want to paint the picture here. There's a story there was a bar and a church that were next to each other. And this church and the bar owner had a feud. And this bar owner and this pastor, for some reason, didn't click. Go figure. Well, something happens. The bar catches on fire and it burns to the ground. Well, a real case happened where the bar owner goes and sues the church because he believed that the church was praying for his bar to be burned to the ground. Well, it's funny because this thing goes to court and the church says, we did nothing of the sorts. And the bar owner said, I believe that they prayed for this bar to burn down. And so the judge is looking at this and says, I don't even know how... I can't even fathom what's going on here because here's what's happening. We have a church that no longer believes in prayer. At least that's what they're telling me. And I have a bar owner that all of a sudden believes in the power of God. And isn't it amazing when non-Christians know better how Christians are to act than Christians? Let me think about this. Jesus, he's crucified and he's buried in a tomb. And all the disciples, man, they knew Jesus. And if they listened to him, Jesus explained exactly how everything was going to go down. Yet it was still a surprise to them. And they thought all hope was gone. And they thought everything was lost. When Jesus was crucified on the cross and he was buried, they thought all hope was gone. And so you have Mary who's going to anoint his body. But when she goes to anoint his body, before that ever happened, there were some soldiers. And they went to the governor. And they go to the governor and they're like, you know, governor, if I recall right, the deceiver, and that's what they would refer to Jesus as, is the deceiver, said something about he would rise again like 3 days later. Do you think maybe we should go check on that thing? Should we go check out that tomb? Should we just go and double check to see if he's still there? So you have these soldiers, the non-believers, that believed what Jesus said he would do. And you have those that walked with Jesus that are surprised. And have you ever been caught in a moment like where... I have. I'm a pastor. And I've had those moments where... You ever make like just a fool out of yourself in front of a non-believer? Someone that doesn't know Jesus? You heard me. I shared mine with you. Like, I'm sure that person that I cut off at Silver City and yelled at, they probably didn't know Jesus. That's why I like having a big old sticker on the back of my truck, because it makes me not do the things like I want to do. I'm still a human. I'm still a human being. Man, Chris Jones back there, he's played basketball with me. Like, I'm not a nice guy. This competitive side of me comes out, and it's dirty, and it's not good. And if you played softball with me, it's not good. There's been so many times I've had to go like apologize to people because of sports. And like, you know, out here I don't like you, but like when we get off this field, I love you. Like seriously, I do. Maybe you don't understand that. And it doesn't justify it. It's not right. But my point in all this is it's amazing when the non-believers understand how a Christian is supposed to act more than a Christian does. And we see this depiction right here with these soldiers. So as we cruise forward a little bit here, as Jesus was crucified, and he said the words, "It's finished," from the cross at Calvary, that's pretty much what everyone felt. It's finished. It's over with. There's no hope. He's crucified. Our hope is gone. They didn't understand that what Jesus was doing when he was crucified on the cross. And I know this is Christmas. We're supposed to be talking about the birth of Jesus. But I think what we need to be talking about is what Jesus came to do. That birth meant something. And we can't just get lost in the pretty nativity scene. That's the beautiful part of it. That's the beauty of Jesus. But the miracle of Jesus is when he was crucified and doing what he said he would do. And so right here he comes, and what he was doing was completing the work that God had sent him to accomplish. And that, in fact, after his crucifixion, he would rise. And so after that, everyone scatters. All of his disciples, they're scattered. Talks about two of his disciples having this experience where they encounter Jesus on this road, and they hope that they encounter Jesus, and they don't even realize that they're seeing him. And how often do we do that to people? How often do we, as believers, the carriers of the message, let people encounter us with the way that we live our life, and they don't even realize that they're encountering Jesus? We carry the message of the cross. We carry the gospel within us. And how often when we go and we live our lives in front of people, do they have no clue what they're in the presence of? Because we're just living. Do you know that when we go into the world, as the Great Commission says, that it's not enough just for us to go and live in the world? We have to go and be like literally start conversations about Christ. We have to go and literally bring up the name of Jesus. We have to go and literally talk about Christ to people. Look for opportunities. Remember my neighbor I was telling you about? He's back. He's home. My circus owning neighbor, he's awesome. Like, he's got his motorhome back, and like there's big trailers and things like. He's back. It's awesome. Like, it was so crazy because he was talking to me. And I've talked about this. Like, if I didn't know Jesus, I probably shouldn't like this guy. But because I know Jesus, I love him. Because as a normal neighbor, he would be horrible. But this guy, like, he comes home. We're outside talking the other day. And it was so funny because he knows now that I have a church. And I'm just wondering if he's watched the messages. But it's all good, man. But like, check this out. He's outside and he's talking about like our homes. Like, we're standing outside and we're looking at our houses, and he's just talking about these things. Like, you know, we're talking about doing this and talking about doing that. And I look at all these things as he says these things, and I'm like, you know what? If you need any help, let me know. I want to come help you. He's like, I'm thinking about maybe leveling some land out and bringing some dirt in. I'd love to put a thing up to put my RV under. And I was like, man, I own this property right here, and if we need to do something, let's figure that out. How can I love him practically? And not just say, like, I just want to be a good neighbor, but find those opportunities. Like, man, this guy brought it up, and he's like, we got to talk about church. And then go beyond that, and I got to find out that, man, this guy at one time was part of this huge church and was this director of all of their like media ministries, and now he uses that in the circus. And I was like, well, what are you doing on Sundays? It's like, well, I'm going to be on the road right now. I'm going to be on the road. But maybe when I get off the road. But I'm just saying, like, we have to go into the world and look for those moments to share about Jesus with our coworkers, with our family, with our friends, with people in need of hope. What are you doing to share hope with the world? So as we cruise through here a little bit more, so everyone scatters. And the non-believers are getting the memos that the Christians didn't, that Jesus is who he said he was. We're called to not isolate, but rather infiltrate our world. And so often we as Christians will do that. We'll isolate ourselves. We'll buddy up in little Bible studies. We listen to just Christian music. We go to just Christian concerts. We just go see Christian comedians. We put ourselves in this bubble where really we get to the point where we're not really any earthly good to Jesus. I mean, really think about that. We're also called to be in the world, but not of it, but be in the world, looking for those opportunities. Jesus was in the world. He knew that this wasn't his home. He knew that this wasn't his final place. He was in the world, but he wasn't of it. And he was so good at just loving people and sharing hope and taking every moment, every opportunity that he had to share the truth, to share the gospel. And all these disciples that walked with him got to see how Jesus shared the truth. And then when Jesus left, he says right here in the Great Commission, now you go into the world baptizing followers of me. And don't just do that. Don't just baptize them, but bring them to maturity. Raise them up so that they can do the same. Think about us as parents. What if we just raised our children, which a lot of us do, to just be needy? Because that's what we as a church do. What we as a church do, we raise people up to be needy. Feed me, feed me, feed me. If you're here for the series at the table, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me. Someone's got to feed. Someone has to feed. Someone has to be on that side. Someone has to do life with people, to love people, to raise them up, to bring them into a maturity of Jesus. These words are given to every follower of Jesus, not just the original 12, those that walk with him. These words are meant not just for the preachers. And preachers, man, we're supposed to be professionals at this. Sometimes we're the worst examples. Sometimes it's the people that are the lay ministers, the people, the servants, that really show the truth of the gospel better than anyone. Sometimes it's the teacher that has the opportunity to love a kid every day and invest in their life. Sometimes it's a police officer, it's a doctor, whatever. Maybe it's the convenience store clerk. Maybe it's just the next door neighbor that cares. I don't know. Sometimes it's not the professional pastor. But think about this. If I'm his disciple, I'm commanded to go and make disciples of others. And if I'm not doing that, if I'm not being the person that is discipling, if I'm not doing what he wants me to do, let me ask this. How are you doing? How are you doing in fulfilling the Great Commission? How are you doing personally in fulfilling the Great Commission? It's not just my job to stand up here and go into the world and make disciples of people. It's not just Christy's job and Crystal's job and little Emily back here. She's a princess, if you didn't know that. She really is. She's an Indian princess. It's not just her job to go into the world to make disciples. I mean, truthfully, look around the room right now. Turn your head and look around at other people just for a moment. Look at the person sitting on the left. Look at the person sitting on the right. Do you see the opportunity that's just sitting in the room right here? Think about this. We're called to go into the world and preach the gospel. These words are given to us by Christ. And if you're not seeking to fulfill the Great Commission, did you know that it could be a sin? If you're not living your life and you know Jesus, that needs to be a preface. If you know Jesus and you are not living your life to fulfill the Great Commission, to go into the world and bring others into a faith, into knowing Jesus, raising them to disciple them to maturity, if you are not devoting your life into that, that can be a sin of omission. There's a sin of commission, and there's a sin of omission. I'll explain the difference to you here. A sin of commission and a sin of omission are different in little ways. There's a story of a teacher teaching Sunday school class, and she asks her kids, she says, do you know what a sin of commission is and a sin of omission is? So one of the little kids raised his hand and says, yeah, I know. A sin of commission is when you do something wrong. She says, yes, Sally, that's very good. That's right. Another little boy says, I know what a sin of omission is. And so the little boy raised his hand and he says, those are the sins that you want to do, but you haven't gotten to yet. Not really. Sins of omission are when you know what you're supposed to do, but you don't do it. Just like that doctor. Just like that fireman. When you know what you're supposed to do, but you don't do it. And as we sit in here and we hear the truth, we're sitting here today, Christmas is upon us, and we're talking about how we live our lives. What am I doing? What am I doing to further the kingdom? Am I taking up space, or am I expanding it? Are you merely taking up space in a church somewhere, standing idly by, or are you expanding the kingdom? That's it. What are you doing to further the kingdom of Christ? And the crazy thing about this, you don't have to be a biblical scholar. So often I get men that will come up to me and they're like, man, I just don't even know how to pray with my daughter. I don't even know how to pray with my wife. You know, I pray for my wife, but I don't know how to pray with her. I can pray for her when she's not in the room, but I don't know how to open my mouth and pray with and over my wife or my daughter. I do whatever. You don't have to be a biblical scholar to be honest. There's so many different ways that we show love. If I went around this room and I talked to the wives about the way husbands share love, some of you are going to be really awful at it, but some of you are going to be really amazing at it. But the crazy cool thing about it is that none of you probably do it in the same way. But it still shows the truth that, there's a fact and there's a truth. We talked about that. The fact is you love your wife. The truth is we show it differently. What are you doing to expand the kingdom of Christ? James 4:17, if anyone then knows the good that they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin for them. I'll read it again. James 4:17, if anyone then knows the good that they ought to do and doesn't do it, it's a sin for them. It's like I was saying, if a fire breaks out and you don't save someone and you have the ability to do it, is that wrong? If there's someone dying in a car wreck and you drive by and you just gawk and look and drive on and let them die, is that wrong? Is that wrong? Yes. We do it every day. We do it every day. We have people that we work with that are dying, that don't know Christ, that don't know truth, that don't know love. We have people that live in our neighborhoods. We have people in this room right now. They're in the room, but they don't know the truth still. Yet we act like it's Black Friday. I got to get mine, and I'm going to walk right over and step right over them. I got to get mine because it's about me. It's about me. It's about me. Go therefore into the world and baptize them. Make disciples of them. Let them know the truth of who I am. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, get yours. Nowhere does it say, get yours. In fact, there's another pretty big commandment that says, love your neighbor as yourself. In fact, even more than yourself. Love others in such a way that they would know me. Love others in such a way that they would know me, not Shane. I want you to love other people if they know me. No. Love others in such a way that they would know Jesus. 1 Corinthians 1:21, since God in his wisdom saw to it that the world would never know him, through human wisdom, he used our foolish preaching to save those who believe. Man, God nailed me on this one. He uses my foolish preaching. He's not saying that preaching is foolish. We shouldn't waste our time with it. But really, he says, you know what? This man is no greater than any of you. I'm no better than anyone else in the room. He uses my foolish, feeble attempts to share the gospel. But because they're his words, because I share his words, there's the truth in that. And we have the same opportunity in our foolish ways to share Christ with a dying world. Romans 10:14, how then can they call on the one that they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? There's really something really important right there in that last line. How can they, who are they? The world. How can the world hear the truth of the gospel without someone preaching to them? And it's not just talking about in here, because guess what this room is not full of? The rest of the world. And then we don't have this big television ministry. We don't have a radio show. We don't have that. We put a little YouTube thing out there. It's out there. But there's only one of me. But look around the room. It doesn't say just to go out there and live a good life. It doesn't say just go out there and love your wife. It doesn't just say go out there and be a good worker. It doesn't just say go out there and do really well at your job. It doesn't say just go out there, make money, and tithe to a church. It doesn't say go out there and just come back to church. It doesn't say, it says go out there and preach to them. And for a lot of you, you're like, but that's the worst thing you can do is preach to somebody. You're right. It's not talking about going out on a street corner and standing there with a bullhorn and making an idiot of Jesus. Think about this. We have to verbalize. What do we have to verbalize? The gospel. What is the gospel? It's the good news. It's the news of Jesus. Imagine if you turned on the news. If any of you even watch that anymore. But imagine if you turned on the news and the reporters just sat there. It's like, oh, 6 o'clock, going to turn on the news, and the reporters just went. What are you doing? I'm just being. I know the news. I know the good news, but well, people are tuning in to know it, to hear it. But if we can picture these little moments and understand that. Have you ever watched the news? Like they do this little job on the news where they'll put a little bit of the bad in, and they'll put a little bit of the good in, they'll put a little bit of the bad in, they'll put a little bit of the good in. Unless you live in Chicago, then it's like all bad. And it's the same thing with us. That as we share, we have to share the truth. We have to share the truth. The news just can't get on there and just tell you the good stories like, today, a puppy was saved. Today, firemen rescued a cat from a tree. Sometimes they have to share the awful truth that today, a building was bombed. A plane flew into a building. Sometimes they have to share the ugly truth that terrorists killed 124 people or whatever, 135 people, and most of them were children. There's the truth of an ugly world out there. There's an enemy that exists. And we have to live our lives in a way to be able to share the truth, the reality that there is an enemy that is out there to steal, kill, and destroy. And there's an enemy that's roaring like a lion, that's like just waiting. Actually, not really roaring, more like creeping. Trying to devour. And we have to share the truth with people that there's a reality called hell. We have to let people know the truth, the consequence, what really exists out there. And once that we share that with them, we can share the hope. They can handle the bad news as long as the good news is there with that. Here's the reality. Hell exists. And I was commanded by Christ to love you in a way that maybe you don't even want to hear it, but to love you in a manner, to love you in a way that you would know the truth, that hell exists, that hell is out there, and that if you don't know Jesus, that is your destiny. Now that you know the truth, let me love you. Not just tell you about hell and the fact that you're going to burn in it, but live with you in a manner that shows you the truth. That makes the truth. Remember I talked about that a few weeks ago? The bread, you can smell it. It'll draw you in. If you ever walk by like a fresh baked bakery, we are to admit the aroma of Christ with our lives. Live our lives in a manner that it's attractive. Love people in a way that the gospel is attractive, not repulsive, not repelling, not that would push people away. You know what people respond to? Generosity. You know what people respond to? Generosity. I will give you everything that I have. My wife usually has to put me around me and be like, no, Shane, you cannot give them your car. You have to use that. No, Shane, you can't give them our food. Christ will just generosity. And I've seen time and 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 again where when I give it away, it comes back. When I give it away, it comes back. And if we would live our lives this way, Christ will keep making sure that you have the resources to continue to love people, to emit that aroma, to continue to show people His glory. And when we can get that through our heads, to love people in that way, you will always have enough. In just the short time that we've started this church, every time I give something away, we get something greater in return. Turn around and look at the man with the beard at the back of the room that gives the finance reports. I scare him to death every week when we get together on Monday, and I'm like, I gave away $1,000. I just invested $700 in someone's car. I just paid someone's electric bill. We just did this. And Travis is going, my budget doesn't understand that faith. There's no line item for faith. But he comes back, and I always get to come back in and say, guess what? It's the truth. This week, we didn't have it. But someone needed a car fixed. So it's like, you know what? Here's $741 to fix your car. The next day, someone says, you know what? I'll take care of $375 of that. The next day, a check for $1,000 came in. Twice what we invested in that woman's car. I'm not bragging about this. I'm trying to show you the truth of the gospel. Twice this week. Man, this isn't my style. I'm not one of these freaks. But I can't deny what's real. Twice this week, I got to go pray with a guy that was 10 hours away from losing his life. And he said yes to Jesus. And then he died at 5:50 the next morning. That was it. But we got to do his funeral and celebrate his life because we knew where his eternity was. Then this week, Thursday, I got to go sit in a room with a woman whose son had died. A woman that goes to this church. Her 27-year-old son died 4 times. He was dead for 45 minutes. 45 minutes. The doctor came in and said if his pulse does come back, he's been gone for 45 minutes. Leandri was sitting in the room. My wife was sitting in the room. Beverly was sitting in the room. This woman put out on her Facebook post that her son was dead. She'd lost him. I sat there and cried as my little daughter looked at me. She had to be there because I didn't have anywhere to take her. This man had a 7-year-old daughter, and he's married, and he has another one that's due in April, and his wife didn't even know that he was dead. We're waiting for her to come back so that we could tell her that her husband died. And then she came into the room, and we told her that her husband was dead, and she passed out, and we had to catch her. He was dead. D-E-D. Dead. A doctor came in and said, there's nothing else that we can do. He's in need of something that I can't give him. A miracle. And I'll be dadgum. I go home that night and I get a text message at 4:30 in the morning. Like, guess what happened? This guy's kidneys start functioning. This guy starts, opens his eyes. This guy starts responding to pain. He wakes up and he grabs, he's on full intubation, life support. He grabs that. Then a few hours later, the guy wakes up and he recognizes his wife. He recognizes his brother. He recognizes his mom. Then he starts answering yes and no questions correctly. And then the doctor, the very doctor that said he will not live, he's dead, came back and said, you know what? I know we have an order to do not resuscitate him, but do you want to change that? And he's gone from that. They just transported him to Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri, and now he is on the list for a heart transplant.
Amen.
Somebody walk up here. I just want to put my hand up. No, I'm just kidding. Not that. I'm just kidding. High five, bro. But here's the truth in all this. Man, I've got so much more, but I can't, there's nothing else I have that's more real than that. There's nothing else I have to give you. Folks, I've witnessed this week a miracle. There's a woman, Linda Theus. You don't believe me? Man, there's no like walkie-talkie coming into my ear saying, Linda Theus. You know, she's blind, touch her forehead. No, nothing. It happened. Every time I give something away, it comes back. My point in all this, what are we doing, church, in our own lives to share this Jesus with the world? I'm not going to lie. That was a pretty good pep talk. This last week that I've had, it's been a pretty good pep talk. I'm pretty fired up. Adversity will come, because guess what happened in the midst of this? I probably had one of the worst weeks of my life. When you step out and you do things for Jesus, adversity will come. And more than likely, it's going to come from inside the church. Here's the truth. I'm going to close with this. There's a Jesus that loves you. There is a Jesus that is in love with you. But it's not just enough for us to love him in return. That's what's different about this. Like my wife, when I love her, she wants my love back. Like she's not saying, okay, Shane, you can love me and every other woman too. And I'm saying the same thing to her. You can't love every other man too. Like this is mine. Christ is saying, I love you, but in return, I want you to love everyone else and tell them about me. I want you to share that with everybody. There's a Jesus that loves you. And then I've got so much more that I prayed for this message that I'm not even going to talk about. The truth is, there's a Jesus that loves you. What are you doing? Are you taking up space? Are you furthering his kingdom? I'm just going to stop right there. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for your faithfulness. That we don't serve a God that is just dead, that we just get to talk about who he was. We get to talk about who he is, who you are, what you're doing, not what you did. Yes, there were things that you did on this earth that set the tone. but there are things that you continue to do both through your power and through what you have left in us. There is a lost, dying world that we are called as your church to love, to raise up, to disciple, to multiply your church, to give in crazy ways, to love in unforeseen ways, to be creative, to be generous, to whatever it takes. If you're in this room today, right now, with every eye closed, every head bowed, if you don't know Jesus, and today you are saying, I don't know Jesus, I don't know this man that you talk of, but you want to know him, I want you to raise your hand right now so I can pray with you. How many of you in this room, still with every head bowed and every eye closed, in this room would say that you personally could do more in your own lives? My hand is up as well. My hope is that as we leave this room today, that it wouldn't just be about Christmas, the generosity at Christmas time. Yes, it's easier right now. But that we would look at the truth of what we are doing with our lives, what we are doing. Are we taking up space, or are we furthering his kingdom? The truth of the matter is you know as much about Jesus right now as you choose to know. Where you are in your walk with Christ is on you. What you're allowing yourself to, the relationships that you're allowing to exist, pursue, to share with other people. My hope is this, is we would examine our lives and say, you know what? Where can I change my life to be less about me and more about you? Less of me and more of you. Less of me and more of you. And I'm saying this to the husbands right now that are so wrapped up in their identity. Maybe it's their job or their work, or maybe they've just given up. So many dads, unfortunately, are just sloths, just taking up space in their own homes. They don't invest in their children. They don't love their wives. They don't love, no, and that's true. So many wives, you feel just so worn out and worn down. Moms, you feel so worn down because you don't have help from dad. And it's just a slippery slope that makes it about me, me, me. So many children are living without a father and a mother because they're so consumed with whatever in their life. Facebook, social media, the fact that they don't make enough money at their job, therefore they're unhappy, whatever, I don't know. They're not happy with their body, they're not happy with their house, they're not happy with, I don't know. Christ never said your circumstances were going to be great. But a lot of that is our own choosing. What are you doing right now for the kingdom of God? What more could you be doing? God, reveal that to us. We ask all this in your name, in the name of Jesus. Amen.